Hey guys, welcome back to Real Talk Cinema, the place where movies aren't just explained, they're felt, unpacked, and deeply explored. Here, we don't just skim the surface, we dive headfirst into the emotional depths, the hidden layers, the powerful moments, and the forgotten details that make every story come alive. Whether it's the thrilling twists, the heartbreaking sacrifices, or the quiet, life changing decisions that shape a character's journey, we're here to break it all down for you in a way that hits hard and stays with you. So buckle up, because on this channel, we don't just watch movies, we live them, we breathe them, and we tell them like no one else. Let's get into it. It all began without warning, a silent, creeping catastrophe that no scientist, no government, and no parent saw coming. The outbreak of idiopathic adolescent acute neurodegeneration, i.e., AN, did not arrive with the fanfare of sirens or the clarity of an impending disaster. It simply emerged invisible and merciless, swallowing children whole, one after another, across playgrounds, classrooms, and dinner tables. At first, it was written off as an isolated illness, a rare misfortune, but the bodies piled up too quickly, too relentlessly, until denial became impossible. In a matter of weeks, the disease spread like a ghost across nations, sparing no family, no city, no culture. The news channels filled with stories of young lives lost, schools became graveyards of memory, and the world plunged into collective mourning so deep that even the skies seemed darker. But the true horror of Ayan was not just in the staggering loss. It was in the cruel selection of the survivors. Roughly 2% of the children lived, but they returned from the jaws of death, carrying something the world could not understand and would not accept: powers. Abilities that defied reason, science, and control. Some could move objects with the wave of a hand, some could summon electricity from thin air, and some, the rarest and most feared, could reach into another's mind and rearrange memories, emotions, and choices as if they were scribbles on a page. These were not ordinary children anymore. They had become something else, something society instinctively recoiled from. What should have been a miracle became a curse. What should have sparked curiosity only bred terror. The government, already paralyzed by the scale of the deaths, reacted with brutal, mechanical efficiency. Under the guise of rehabilitation, they established containment camps that were nothing short of prisons, cold and militarized, where these gifted children were dragged away from their homes, stripped of their identities, and branded with colored classifications that would forever define their worth and their danger. Green, blue, gold, red, orange, labels that pretended to offer order but instead built walls of fear and segregation. To be green meant you were a curiosity. To be blue meant you were a risk. To be gold meant you were a threat. To be red or orange meant you were a walking death sentence. Ruby Daly's world is born from these ashes. She is not just a survivor of the disease. She is a survivor of the system that rose in its wake. A child forced to hide her true power, to erase her presence from her own family's memory, just to survive another day in the camp's suffocating grip. For Ruby and countless others, childhood ends the moment their powers awaken. They are not nurtured or protected, they are hunted, caged, and conditioned to believe that their very existence is a crime. But beneath this oppressive reality, the outbreak of Aeon is not simply a disease. It is the spark of a social collapse that exposes humanity's deepest flaws. It reveals how quickly society turns on its own when fear outweighs love, how governments will trade compassion for control in a heartbeat, and how power structures will rewrite the meaning of good and evil to serve their own survival. The disease becomes a metaphor for difference, for the parts of ourselves that the world demands we suppress or destroy to fit in. And as the story unfolds, it becomes painfully clear. The real virus is not IAN. It is the fear that consumes the world in its aftermath. The outbreak doesn't just set the story in motion, it tears the soul from the world and leaves behind a battlefield where children must either rise as leaders or vanish as ghosts. It is in this wasteland of trust and hope that Ruby begins her journey, where every choice is a gamble between freedom and survival, and where the darkest minds may be the last flickers of light. In the aftermath of the IIN outbreak, when the world's panic reached its peak, and the government's grip tightened like iron shackles around the remaining children. A cold, unforgiving system was born, a system that would forever categorize and divide those who survived. The classification system, designed under the guise of safety protocols, was not merely a method of organization. It became a ruthless hierarchy of fear, a color coded sentence that determined a child's value, danger, and fate. Once captured, each child was tested and immediately branded by a color that would follow them like a curse for the rest of their lives if they survived at all. Greens, blues, golds, reds, oranges. These colors were more than labels. They were cages. To be labeled green meant you were deemed the least threatening. A child with nothing more than extraordinary intelligence, a living puzzle piece, perhaps even useful. The government could tolerate greens because they could be controlled. Blues, the next step up, had telekinetic abilities, the power to move objects with their minds, making them dangerously unpredictable, yet still considered manageable within the suffocating walls of the camps. Golds, those rare and electric souls who could command the very forces of energy, bending electricity to their will, were treated with growing dread, their abilities capable of triggering explosions or disabling entire systems with just a spark. But the color that painted the blood of fear deepest into the hearts of the authorities was red. To be labeled red was to be seen as uncontrollable, destructive, a walking firestorm that could incinerate anything in its path. And worse still, the color that wasn't just feared but annihilated on sight, orange. Oranges could invade the sanctity of the mind. They could manipulate thoughts, erase memories, twist desires, control decisions. Their power was the one thing the government could neither predict nor contain. Oranges were so dangerous that the mere discovery of one often led to immediate execution. To see the color orange on your classification badge was to receive a death sentence wrapped in plastic. The system didn't care about innocence. It didn't care about the humanity of the children it processed. It was a brutal assembly line designed to strip them of identity, to condense their existence to a single color coded threat level. Children as young as 5 were forced to line up, eyes filled with confusion, terror, and the weight of betrayal, as cold machines and heartless soldiers reduced their lives to a flash of green, blue, gold, red, or orange. They were no longer sons, daughters, friends, or dreamers. They became files, risks, liabilities. Ruby Daly, when processed, should have been classified as an orange, the most dangerous of them all, but in an act of sheer desperation and subconscious survival, she wiped her examiner's memory, unknowingly saving her own life but condemning herself to a life of lies. She was mistakenly placed among the greens, hiding her devastating power beneath a mask of false security. Every day she walked the tightrope of exposure, knowing that one slip could mean immediate death or capture by those who saw her not as a person, but as a weapon to be destroyed. This classification system wasn't just a prison, it was a mirror of a society that could not see beyond fear. It was the institutionalization of prejudice, the enforcement of division, and the methodical destruction of childhood under the weight of militarized paranoia. It didn't ask who these children were. It only asked how quickly they could be controlled, or if they needed to be eliminated. In this color-coded nightmare, every choice, every breath, every heartbeat became a gamble with survival, and Ruby's very existence within the false safety of green was a countdown to inevitable discovery. The colors may have been the system's way of maintaining order, but for the children, those colors were the very chains that bound them to a life where freedom was nothing more than a distant, fading memory dot. In the cold silence of a world that had already turned its back on her, Ruby Daly's awakening was not a moment of triumph, it was a moment of terror. She was just a little girl when the sickness came, an innocent caught in the tidal wave of a disease that had already swallowed her friends, her classmates, her neighborhood. But Ruby didn't die. She survived. And survival came with a price. When her powers first surfaced, they didn't announce themselves with grandeur or spectacle. They crept in like a shadow, silent and devastating. It happened on her birthday, a day that should have been a celebration of life, of family, but instead became the day she lost everything she loved, by her own hands, in a way she didn't yet understand. Without meaning to, Ruby slipped into her mother's mind, a touch so subtle yet so deeply invasive that she erased herself from her parents' memories. She didn't just lose them, they forgot she ever existed. The very people who gave her life suddenly recoiled from her like she was a stranger, a ghost haunting the halls of her own home. In a heartbeat, Ruby was utterly alone, invisible in the place she once called safe. That single, irreversible mistake set her on a path of forced exile, where she would no longer belong to anyone, not her family, not her school, not even the camps where she was eventually imprisoned. When the government found her, they labeled her as a green, the safest classification, but it was a lie, a necessary lie. A lie that allowed her to live one more day under the suffocating surveillance of the rehabilitation camps. Every heartbeat inside that camp was a gamble, every glance from a guard a threat, every whispered conversation a possible death sentence if she revealed the truth. Ruby wasn't just another child locked away behind electrified fences. She was an orange, one of the rare, terrifying few who could control minds, erase memories, bend wills. And the camps had a policy for oranges, extermination on sight. So, Ruby became a ghost within a cage. She spent years suppressing her own nature, terrified of what she might do, terrified of what she might become. The powers that bloomed inside her weren't a gift, they were a ticking time bomb she couldn't defuse. She lived with the crushing weight of her secret, the knowledge that exposure would bring instant death, not just for her, but potentially for those around her. The fear seeped into her bones, shaped the way she moved, the way she breathed, the way she trusted no one. Ruby's secret identity wasn't just a disguise, it became her survival, her curse, and her prison. And yet, in this slow, suffocating isolation, something powerful was building inside her. Suppressed, repressed, buried under layers of fear and denial, Ruby's mind sharpened, her senses expanded, and her power grew stronger, waiting for the inevitable moment when she would be forced to choose. Continue hiding, or step into the truth of who she really was, no matter how terrifying that truth might be. Ruby's awakening is not a typical superhero origin. It is not a celebration of new abilities. It is the shattering of everything she knows, the severing of all connections, and the agonizing birth of a girl who must navigate a world that will kill her if it ever truly sees her. She does not want this power. She does not embrace it. She fears it. But deep within her, even in the darkest corners of her broken childhood, a spark refuses to die. And that spark, when ignited, will change not only Ruby's life, but the fate of all the children trapped in this dystopian nightmare. For years, Ruby daily lived in the suffocating shadows of the rehabilitation camp, where freedom was a forgotten dream and every day was a silent war for survival. But fate stirred when a woman named Kate Begbie appeared, her presence wrapped in the cold precision of government authority, but her eyes carrying a flicker of something Ruby hadn't seen in a long time: hope. Kate didn't come with guns blazing or loud promises. She came quietly, slipping past the fortress-like walls, disguising herself as part of the brutal machine that ran the camps. But beneath that carefully built facade, Kate was part of something far more dangerous: the Children's League, an underground rebellion fighting to rescue kids like Ruby from the iron grip of the government. The escape Kate orchestrated was not a grand revolution. It was a fragile, high-stakes whisper in a world that screamed control. Ruby's life balanced on the edge of discovery. If even one guard suspected she was an orange, she would be killed on the spot. Kate knew this. Every step she took, every word she spoke, was calculated with surgical precision. In a world where lies were survival currency, Kate offered Ruby a terrifying alternative: a chance to run. But running meant more than breaking the camp's gates. It meant Ruby had to trust a stranger in a world that had taught her that trust was a deadly gamble. As Kate guided Ruby through the treacherous layers of the camp, through the medical checkpoints, armed watchtowers, and security gates bristling with motion sensors, Ruby's heart pounded with the brutal rhythm of terror and fragile hope. Every hallway they crossed, Every uniformed guard they passed felt like a potential executioner. And yet, Kate's calm voice kept pulling Ruby forward, whispering the impossible. Freedom is just beyond this door. But even freedom was tangled in shadows. The escape was not the end. It was the beginning of an even more dangerous game. The moment Ruby stepped outside the camp's monstrous fences, breathing air that no longer belonged to her captors, she realized something chilling. She was free, but she was not safe. Kate's organization, the Children's League, promised protection, but their motives dripped with complexity. They didn't just want to save Ruby, they wanted to use her. They saw her not just as a victim, but as a weapon in the making, a powerful orange that could tip the scales in their secret war against the government. Ruby's freedom, fragile and incomplete, was suddenly burdened by new chains. The weight of promises she wasn't sure she believed, alliances she wasn't sure she could trust, and the looming question: was she truly free, or had she just stepped into another prison with prettier walls? Kate became the first adult to offer Ruby a choice, but it was a choice laced with thorns. Follow the League, a network Ruby barely understood, or run alone in a world where her face was now a target. The escape was more than a physical jailbreak. It was Ruby's violent birth into a world of half-truths, shifting loyalties, and constant pursuit. Every step outside the camp brought her closer to discovering who she really was, but also pulled her deeper into a war where children were pawns, weapons, and occasionally revolutionaries. Kate may have been her savior that day, but she was also a doorway to a life where the line between friend and enemy would forever be blurred. Ruby escaped the camp, but she had not yet escaped the web that had been spun around her since the day her powers first awakened. When Ruby finally broke free from the steel cages of the rehabilitation camp, she found herself stepping into a world that was no less dangerous than the one she had escaped. The outside was not a sanctuary. It was a wild, chaotic wasteland where children with powers were still hunted, betrayed, and discarded like broken tools. Ruby, isolated and drowning in the weight of her secret identity, wandered this brutal landscape until fate led her to three souls who would forever change her life: Liam, Chubs, and Zoo. Their meeting wasn't cinematic in the traditional sense, no fireworks, no grand introduction, but in the quiet desperation of survival, they found each other like stray stars converging in the same dark sky. Liam, with his kind eyes and the quiet strength of someone who had shouldered more burdens than any child should ever carry, reached out to Ruby when no one else would. He didn't see a label, a threat, or a government classification. He saw a girl alone, trembling and lost. In a world where trust had become a foreign language, Liam's instinct to protect rather than question became Ruby's first glimpse of what real friendship might still look like. Chubs, ever the skeptic, didn't welcome Ruby with open arms. His sharp tongue and suspicious glare were his armor, forged from countless betrayals and a lifetime of being forced to think 10 steps ahead just to survive. He was the strategist, the voice of caution, and the reminder that the world didn't hand out miracles. But beneath his sarcasm and relentless vigilance was a heart fiercely loyal, one that would bleed for the people he dared to call family. Chubbs didn't trust easily, but when he did, his faith was immovable. And then there was Zoo, the smallest among them, draped in silence yet speaking volumes through her actions. Her golden gloves weren't just protection from the powers she could barely control. They were shields against a world that had stolen her voice. Zoo, though wordless, was the thread that stitched them all together. Her innocence, her quiet strength, and the way she clung to Ruby's hand without hesitation, these were her words. These were her declarations of trust in a world that had given her no reason to believe in anyone. As the four of them journeyed across desolate highways, abandoned towns, and forests that whispered the ghosts of the lives they had all lost, something profound began to grow among them: a found family. They were not bound by blood, but by the mutual understanding of what it meant to be feared, hunted, and discarded. In each other, they found something the world had stripped away: safety, laughter, belonging. Around campfires, on stolen trucks, and during frantic escapes from soldiers, They carved out moments of fleeting peace that reminded them they were still children, still capable of joy, even in the ruins of their world. But this bond was not forged without fear. Ruby's secret loomed over her like a storm cloud. Every time Liam's hand brushed against hers, every time Chubs began to lower his guard, every time Zoo's small fingers wrapped around her own, Ruby felt the crushing weight of her lie. She was an orange. She was what they had been taught to fear, and the terror of losing them was sometimes greater than the terror of being found by the government. Ruby's found family was her safe haven, but it was built on borrowed time, a fragile dream that could shatter with a single confession. Meeting Liam, Chubbs, and Zoo was not just a narrative turning point, it was the heartbeat of Ruby's story. In their presence, Ruby didn't just find friends, she found pieces of herself she thought had died in the camp. Their journey was a delicate rebellion against the world's labels, a quiet refusal to let fear define them, and a powerful reminder that sometimes the family you choose can heal wounds no power ever could. In a world drenched in fear, where survival demanded suspicion, violence, and impossible choices, Zoo became the most extraordinary contradiction. A child of war who carried the weapon of electricity in her small, trembling hands, yet chose silence and compassion as her shield. Zoo didn't speak, but her silence was never a void. It was a language all its own, a powerful declaration in a world where every spoken word seemed to belong to someone else's agenda. The golden gloves she wore, seemingly to contain her electrical powers, became her armor, not just to protect others from her touch, but to guard herself from the crushing weight of her own abilities. Zoo's presence in the group was gentle, almost fragile, but beneath her quiet footsteps was an ocean of unspoken strength. She wasn't loud like Chubbs, nor did she carry the commanding leadership of Liam, but she was the emotional heartbeat that held them all together. Where the others carried the scars of betrayal, abandonment, and violence, Zoo's wound was more invisible. The loss of her voice, perhaps taken by the trauma she endured, perhaps given up as a way to preserve what little agency she had left in a world that constantly tried to control her. Ruby, from the moment she met Zoo, felt an instinctive pull toward her, a deep, protective urge that went beyond words. Perhaps because she saw in Zoo the child she herself had lost when her powers first manifested. Perhaps because Zoo's silence gave Ruby a place to lower her own defenses. Perhaps because Zoo's small hand wrapped around hers without question, without fear, without demand. And that simple act became one of the most powerful gestures in the film. It said, I trust you, even if I don't understand you. And for Ruby, who had built a life on the fear of being discovered, that unspoken trust cut deeper than any spoken promise. Zoo's powers, her ability to command electricity, were not just a visual spectacle, they were the embodiment of restrained chaos. She could have burned her enemies to ash, lit the sky with her rage, yet she remained profoundly gentle, using her abilities not for destruction, but for escape, for protection, for moments where violence was the only option left to survive. In Zoo, the story threads a delicate theme that innocence is not the absence of power, it is the choice of how to wield it. Zoo's silence also served as a mirror to the oppressive world around her. In a society where children's voices were silenced by fences, guns, and color coded labels, Zoo's refusal to speak became a quiet rebellion, a way to reclaim control over a life that had been hijacked. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She didn't need to speak to be understood. Her loyalty, her fear, her joy, and her pain radiated in her expressions, her gestures, her willingness to hold hands in the darkest moments and to let go when the time came. And though she was the smallest in the group, Zoo's silent strength was the glue that kept them all from breaking apart. When Ruby felt the crushing weight of her secret, when Liam began to falter beneath his burdens, when Chubb's skepticism nearly drove him to walk away, Zoo was always there, small, quiet, watching, anchoring them to the fragile humanity they were all fighting to preserve. She didn't need words to be a lighthouse in their storm. She simply existed, brave in her own way, gentle even when the world was cruel, and powerful in her refusal to let that cruelty consume her. In Zoo's silence, the film speaks volumes. It reminds us that not all power is loud, not all leadership is visible, and not all battles are won with fists. Sometimes it is the quiet, unwavering presence of someone who simply refuses to give up on you that carries you forward. In a world where trust is a currency far too expensive, where betrayal hides behind every friendly face, Liam Stewart stands tall as a rare and precious anomaly, a leader not forged by ambition, but by love, pain, and relentless responsibility. From the very first moment Ruby meets him, there is a quiet gravity to Liam's presence, an unspoken promise that even in a crumbling, merciless world, someone still chooses to protect instead of destroy. But Liam's leadership is not loud. It is not built on commanding orders or domineering strength. It is carved from the quiet sacrifices that slowly tear at his own soul. Liam isn't the leader because he wants to be. He is the leader because he has to be. In a landscape where children are hunted like fugitives, where the government's eyes are always watching, where safety is as fleeting as a passing cloud, someone has to carry the weight of decisions that no child should ever have to make. And that burden, over time, has settled like iron chains around Liam's shoulders. His power as a blue allows him to move objects with his mind, but his true power lies in his ability to move people, with compassion, with sincerity, and with the quiet strength of someone who would rather break himself than allow his friends to fall. When Ruby enters his world, Liam's protective instincts immediately awaken, but not because he sees her as weak. He sees her as a survivor, someone who is drowning in secrets and self loathing. He recognizes in her the same fractures he carries, the unbearable fear of losing the ones you love, the desperation to belong, the ache of navigating a life where every choice feels like a trap. And though Ruby hides her true identity, Liam trusts her without demanding proof. He offers his friendship with no strings attached, something so rare in Ruby's broken world that it terrifies her more than the soldiers hunting them. Liam's leadership is tested over and over again, whether it's finding food in an abandoned gas station, sneaking past checkpoints, or shielding Chubs and Zoo from the endless dangers that stalk their every step. But what sets Liam apart is not just his bravery, it is his refusal to let his friends become weapons, even when the world insists that's all they are. He could have easily hardened himself, become another soldier in the fight, but Liam clings to his humanity like it's the last thing tethering him to the boy he used to be before the camps, before the labels, before the endless running. And yet, Liam is far from invincible. Beneath his steady hand and brave face, there is a boy who is exhausted, who is fraying at the edges from the unbearable responsibility of keeping everyone alive. He carries his own guilt, his own secrets, his own silent griefs that he rarely allows anyone to see. Every life he cannot save, every friend he has lost along the way, is carved into his memory like scars he cannot erase. But even in his darkest moments, Liam's instinct is always to protect, to lead, to love. His relationship with Ruby blossoms slowly, a tender connection born not from adrenaline or desperation, but from shared pain and cautious hope. Liam doesn't try to fix Ruby, he simply stands beside her, offering her a space where she is not a danger, not a weapon, not a label, but just a girl who deserves to be cared for. In a world where so many have tried to control her, Liam is the one who allows her to simply be. Liam's leadership, in the end, is a rebellion against the cold calculations of the color coded system. He is living proof that kindness is not weakness, that protecting others is not a burden but a choice, and that even when you are hunted, even when you are broken, you can still choose to carry someone else's weight. His love, his sacrifices, and his steady heart anchor the group when everything else is falling apart. And through Liam, the darkest minds reminds us that sometimes the strongest leaders are not the ones who fight the hardest, but the ones who refuse to let the people they love be swallowed by the darkness. Among the band of survivors that Ruby stumbles into, Chubb stands out as the sharp-edged, quick-witted, fiercely protective soul whose skepticism often borders on harshness, but whose heart is stitched together with threads of loyalty and quiet, selfless love. Where Liam is instinctively trusting and open-hearted, Chubbs is the guarded tactician, The one who scans the horizon for betrayal, the one who questions every new face, the one who keeps his walls high, not because he wants to be cold, but because he has learned, brutally and repeatedly, that trusting the wrong person can cost you everything. When Chubs first meets Ruby, his eyes are narrowed, his words are clipped, and his silence speaks louder than his suspicion. He doesn't welcome her with open arms. He dissects her story, measures her body language, weighs her silences. In a world where a single lie can lead to death, Chubbs has become the unspoken guardian of his makeshift family, the one who interrogates every situation, every person, every risk. His skepticism isn't bitterness, it is survival sharpened into precision. Chubbs has seen too many traps, too many losses. He is not willing to gamble with Liam's life, with Zoo's safety, or with his own fractured hope. But what makes Chubb such a beautifully layered character is the slow, reluctant softening that happens as Ruby proves, piece by piece, that she is not a threat. He doesn't fall into trust easily. It is earned, painfully and carefully, through shared dangers, through moments where Ruby chooses their safety over her own, through the times when her silence speaks of burdens too heavy for any child to carry alone. Chubbs watches, and when he finally lowers his guard, it is not just acceptance, it is a gift. His trust is sacred, rare, and fiercely protected. Chubbs is the intellectual engine of the group. His intelligence is razor sharp, his strategy is meticulous, and his ability to read situations often saves them from disaster. He is the one who catches the small details, who questions the myths, who is never satisfied with half truths. When the others would chase legends, like the rumored East River Sanctuary, Chubbs demands proof. He is the realist among dreamers, the anchor among drifting hearts. Yet beneath his sarcasm, his biting observations, and his relentless questions, Chubbs is a boy who aches for connection. He pretends to push people away, but every time danger circles their group, he stands firm, ready to sacrifice himself without hesitation. His loyalty is ferocious. He may question you, argue with you, challenge you, but when the time comes to protect you, he will not falter. One of Chubb's most profound moments comes not in battle, but in quiet vulnerability, when his injuries force the group to confront the cost of their rebellion, when his life hangs in the balance and Ruby's carefully built world begins to crumble around her. Chubb's near death is not just a physical wound, it is the shattering of the illusion that they can escape this war untouched. For Ruby, losing Chubbs would be losing a piece of the family she never dared to hope for. For Liam, it is the moment when leadership can no longer shield the people he loves from harm. And for Chubbs, it is a brutal reminder that even the most careful plans, even the sharpest minds, cannot always outmaneuver fate. Chubb's journey from skepticism to brotherhood is one of the most emotionally satisfying arcs in the darkest minds. He is the embodiment of how trust is built, brick by brick, how family is not always born, but made, and how love often hides behind the toughest walls. He teaches Ruby and the audience that real loyalty is not blind. It is watchful, it is cautious, but when it is finally given, it is unbreakable. In Chubbs, the story finds its compass, its heartbeat of reason, and a fierce, unforgettable reminder that even the most guarded hearts can still choose to belong. As Ruby, Liam, Chubbs, and Zoo navigate the unforgiving wastelands of a world that hunts them like animals, the legend of East River flickers like a distant star in their broken sky, a rumored sanctuary, a place untouched by the brutal chains of the government, where kids like them can finally be free. In a life where every promise has been a lie, where every escape route has been a trap, the very idea of East River feels almost impossible, too perfect, too hopeful, too good to be true. But when you've been running for so long that your soul forgets what rest feels like, even a myth becomes worth chasing. The whispers of East River spread like wildfire among the children on the run. It is said to be a hidden camp, far beyond the reach of the PSF's Special Forces, where there are no color classifications, no cages, no guns. It is a place where kids with powers are not monsters, but survivors, not prisoners, but leaders of their own destiny. For Ruby and her new family, this rumored sanctuary becomes more than just a location. It becomes a symbol of hope, freedom, and maybe, just maybe, a future. But beneath their growing desire to find East River, especially for Liam, burns an unspoken question that Chubs never stops asking. Can it really be real? Chubs, ever the skeptic, suspects the cruel hand of the government behind such an appealing story. In a world where the authorities have already perfected manipulation, where fear, control, and psychological warfare are everyday weapons, what better trap than to dangle the dream of a safe haven in front of desperate kids? What better bait than freedom? Still, Ruby feels the pull. Not just because she wants safety, but because she yearns to stop running. She is exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally, from living in the tight, suffocating shell of secrecy. East River begins to represent more than shelter. It represents the chance to finally lower her guard, to finally exist as herself, even if that self is dangerous. It is the promise of belonging without lies. As their journey pushes them closer to the myth, the roads grow more perilous, the soldiers more relentless, and the stakes far deadlier. Every step toward East River is a gamble with their lives. Yet, hope, even the faintest ember, has always been powerful enough to drag people through the darkest storms. Liam's determination to find East River is not just about survival, it is about building a life worth surviving for. For Zoo, it is the chance to stop hiding behind gloves and silence. For Ruby, it is the possibility of stepping out from behind her mask without losing everything. But myths are dangerous, and dreams in this broken world come with sharp edges. The legend of East River is not simply about reaching a place, it is about confronting the terrifying possibility that the sanctuary you crave may not exist, or worse, that it exists but is not what it seems. The journey toward East River forces each of them to confront their deepest fears. What if freedom is just another illusion? What if trust, even here, is just another weapon? East River, whether real or imagined, drives them forward, ignites their courage, and tests their resolve. It is not just a physical destination, it is the representation of the human spirit's refusal to be caged. It is the spark that keeps them moving through loss, through betrayal, through grief. And when they finally find it, the truth that waits for them will shatter everything they thought they knew about freedom, safety, and the cost of believing in something better. As Ruby, Liam, Chubs, and Zoo navigate the unforgiving wastelands of a world that hunts them like animals, the legend of East River flickers like a distant star in their broken sky. A rumored sanctuary, a place untouched by the brutal chains of the government, where kids like them can finally be free. In a life where every promise has been a lie, where every escape route has been a trap, the very idea of East River feels almost impossible. Too perfect, too hopeful, too good to be true. But when you've been running for so long that your soul forgets what rest feels like, even a myth becomes worth chasing. The whispers of East River spread like wildfire among the children on the run. It is said to be a hidden camp, far beyond the reach of the PSFs, Psy Special Forces, where there are no color classifications, no cages, no guns. It is a place where kids with powers are not monsters, but survivors, not prisoners, but leaders of their own destiny. For Ruby and her new family, this rumored sanctuary becomes more than just a location. It becomes a symbol of hope, freedom, and maybe, just maybe, a future. But beneath their growing desire to find East River, especially for Liam, burns an unspoken question that Chubs never stops asking. Can it really be real? Chubs, ever the skeptic, suspects the cruel hand of the government behind such an appealing story. In a world where the authorities have already perfected manipulation, where fear, control, and psychological warfare are everyday weapons, what better trap than to dangle the dream of a safe haven in front of desperate kids? What better bait than freedom? Still, Ruby feels the pull, not just because she wants safety, but because she yearns to stop running. She is exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally, from living in the tight, suffocating shell of secrecy. East River begins to represent more than shelter. It represents the chance to finally lower her guard, to finally exist as herself, even if that self is dangerous. It is the promise of belonging without lies. As their journey pushes them closer to the myth, the roads grow more perilous, the soldiers more relentless, and the stakes far deadlier. Every step toward East River is a gamble with their lives. Yet hope, even the faintest ember, has always been powerful enough to drag people through the darkest storms. Liam's determination to find East River is not just about survival, it is about building a life worth surviving for. For Zoo, it is the chance to stop hiding behind gloves and silence. For Ruby, it is the possibility of stepping out from behind her mask without losing everything. But myths are dangerous, and dreams in this broken world come with sharp edges. The legend of East River is not simply about reaching a place, it is about confronting the terrifying possibility that the sanctuary you crave may not exist, or worse, that it exists but is not what it seems. The journey toward East River forces each of them to confront their deepest fears. What if freedom is just another illusion? What if trust, even here, is just another weapon? East River, whether real or imagined, drives them forward, ignites their courage, and tests their resolve. It is not just a physical destination, it is the representation of the human spirit's refusal to be caged. It is the spark that keeps them moving through loss, through betrayal, through grief. And when they finally find it, the truth that waits for them will shatter everything they thought they knew about freedom, safety, and the cost of believing in something better. After an exhausting, heart pounding journey through a world that seemed to close in on them at every turn, Ruby, Liam, Chubs, and Zoo finally arrive at East River, a place that has lived in their minds as the last glowing ember of hope, the final refuge in a landscape scorched by fear and betrayal. At first glance, East River feels like the impossible dream finally realized. It is vibrant, self sustaining, brimming with children like them, Psy kids with powers, living openly without the cruel classifications or prison walls. They laugh, they train, they eat together. They are no longer hiding, they are living. And at the center of it all stands a boy whose name has echoed through government reports and parental nightmares. Clancy Gray, the son of the US president, an orange like Ruby, a living contradiction who should have been executed but somehow survived. Clancy is the embodiment of forbidden possibility, a child with the most dangerous abilities, yet fully in control of his life, commanding respect, wielding his power without fear. To Ruby, he is magnetic, terrifying, and profoundly fascinating. Clancy understands what she is. He understands the weight of her silence, the suffocating fear of her own power, the loneliness of being born into a world that wants to erase you. He offers her something Liam, Chubs, and Zoo never could: the chance to finally embrace what she is, to step into her abilities instead of running from them. For the first time, Ruby allows herself to hope that maybe Clancy is the key to her freedom, not just from soldiers or fences, but from the prison of her own fear. Clancy becomes her mentor, her mirror, her confidant. He shows her how to control her powers, how to navigate minds without collapsing under the weight of guilt. He pushes her to unleash the parts of herself she has been too terrified to touch. But what begins as a mentorship quietly twists into something darker, something Ruby senses too late. Clancy's control is not just a skill, it is an addiction. He does not teach Ruby to control herself so she can be free. He teaches her to control so she can dominate. His calm, almost tender guidance is laced with manipulation, his kindness carefully constructed to pull her into his orbit. When the truth finally unravels, it hits like a blade to the heart. East River is not a sanctuary, it is a trap. It is a carefully curated illusion designed by Clancy to gather powerful Psy kids, not to protect them, but to weaponize them, to eventually offer them back to the government on his own terms, playing both sides for his own rise to power. He has mastered the art of mind control, not just with abilities, but with charisma, with emotional puppeteering. He has used Ruby's desperation to belong, her aching desire for safety, to bend her to his will. The betrayal cuts deeper than any physical wound because it destroys the one thing Ruby barely dared to believe in: trust. Clancy's violation of Ruby's mind is not just an abuse of power, it is a shattering invasion of self. He forces her to confront the terrifying truth that the powers she has run from, the powers she has feared, can also be used to destroy, to manipulate, to enslave. His betrayal leaves a scar that won't fade, not because he overpowered her, but because he made her question her own reflection. If she can be manipulated into trusting someone like Clancy, what does that say about her own ability to judge, to protect, to lead? The fall of East River is not just the collapse of a place, it is the collapse of an idea. It is the brutal realization that in this war, even the people who claim to save you may only be building prettier prisons. Clancy's betrayal forces Ruby to grow, to harden, to understand that power without empathy is monstrous, and trust without caution can be lethal. In Clancy, The Darkest Minds gives us the perfect villain, not the snarling soldier with a gun, but the boy who understands you, who speaks your language, who makes you believe he's the answer to all your fears, only to show you that the darkest minds sometimes wear the brightest smiles. After the earth-shattering betrayal at East River, Ruby Daly stands at the crossroads of her identity, no longer the terrified girl who trembled beneath the weight of her abilities, but not yet the leader the resistance needs her to become. The mask of innocence she wore has been ripped away, her trust shattered by Clancy's manipulation, and the safety she had clung to in her friends now feels as fragile as glass. For most of her life, Ruby's relationship with her power had been rooted in fear. It was something she suppressed, something she despised, something she believed would destroy anyone who got too close. But now, as she emerges from the ruins of the East River, Ruby begins a profound, painful transformation. She stops running from who she is. She chooses to embrace it. This shift is not instant. It is not a cinematic moment where she suddenly wields her powers like a superhero. It is a gradual, wrenching process of acceptance, a journey where Ruby finally acknowledges that her abilities are not inherently evil, that they do not have to be the tools of destruction Clancy wanted to shape them into. For years, she had built her identity around hiding, around silence, around shrinking herself to fit a world that demanded her erasure. But with Clancy's betrayal, she is forced to confront the brutal truth. If she doesn't claim her power, someone else will. Ruby begins to train, not with the timid reluctance of her past self, but with purpose, with fire. She learns to step into the storm of her own mind, to pull the threads of thought and memory in others without collapsing under guilt. She learns that control isn't about suppression, it's about understanding. It's about choosing how to wield her strength, not letting fear dictate her every move. For the first time, she isn't just surviving, she's preparing to fight. Not for vengeance, but for freedom. For herself, for Liam, for Zoo, for every child still locked away in camps with no one to save them. But this transformation is laced with sorrow, because Ruby knows that becoming who she was always meant to be comes at a cost. Power distances, power isolates, power attracts danger. The more she steps into her abilities, the more she feels the weight of leadership pressing down on her, the more she senses that one day she may have to make impossible choices, sacrifices that could break her. Her bond with Liam deepens during this time, but it is painted with a new kind of fear. Not the fear of losing him to soldiers or the government, but the fear of losing him to herself. Ruby now carries a power that could rewrite his memories, bend his will, erase herself from his heart if she chose to. The intimacy between them is both beautiful and unbearably fragile, because Liam loves her for who she is. But Ruby now questions if she can trust herself with the power to control the very people she loves. Her transformation is not just about physical strength or mastering abilities, it is a reclaiming of self. Ruby moves from the terrified, silenced girl who erased herself from her parents' memories to a young woman who understands that to fight for freedom, she must first fight for the right to exist as she is. No more hiding, no more apologizing for her powers, no more allowing others to define her worth. In this painful but necessary evolution, The Darkest Minds crafts a heroine who is deeply flawed, deeply human, and profoundly brave. Ruby doesn't step into the light because she's fearless. She steps into it because she's tired of letting fear own her. And in that choice, She begins to embody the very hope she once believed was lost. As Ruby's journey barrels toward its most agonizing crossroads, she finds herself standing at the sharpest edge of love and survival, where the price of freedom is no longer just measured in danger. It is measured in memories, in the precious, irreplaceable moments that define who we are and who we hold closest. Liam Stewart is not just her friend, not just her protector, he is her heartbeat, the one person who saw her fully and loved her anyway, even when she couldn't love herself. And it is precisely because of that love that Ruby is forced to make the most devastating choice of her life, to let him go, not by walking away, but by erasing herself from his memory. The government's grip is tightening. Liam's face is now stamped across wanted posters, his very existence a flashing target. If he stays by Ruby's side, he is as good as captured, or worse. Their enemies are closing in, and Ruby knows with bone deep certainty that if she doesn't act, Liam will die trying to protect her. But more than that, she knows she carries a weapon inside her that could destroy the people she loves if she ever loses control. In her hands, her power is not just a tool of survival, it is now the only key left to save him. The decision to wipe Liam's memory is not made in anger or desperation, it is made in love, and that is what makes it so profoundly, unbearably painful. Ruby does not want to disappear from his life. Every fiber of her being screams against it, but she chooses to give him freedom the only way she knows how, to leave him with his life intact, even if it costs her their shared history, even if it shatters her own soul. In a world that has ripped everything from her, Ruby makes the conscious choice to rip herself from Liam's memory, becoming a ghost in the life where she once mattered most. The scene is haunting, tender, and drenched in quiet tragedy. As Ruby stands before Liam, her trembling fingers reaching into the sacred corners of his mind, her heart fractures with every memory she untangles and erases. She does not simply remove his knowledge of her presence, she unthreads the laughter, the trust, the whispered moments by the fire, the handholds, the secret smiles, all the fragile pieces that made their bond real. She removes the very foundation of their connection to protect him from the weight of loving someone like her. And yet, what makes this sacrifice so beautifully heartbreaking is that Liam, even as his memories fade, senses something slipping away. His body clings to her, his heart fights against the erasure, as if some deep part of him refuses to let her go. But Ruby's hands are steady, her decision final. She does not allow herself to beg for one more minute, one more embrace, one more chance. Because love, true love, is sometimes not about holding on, it's about letting go, even when it tears you apart. This moment becomes the soul of Ruby's transformation. She no longer fears her power, but she now bears the crushing weight of the choices that come with it. She has stepped fully into her identity as an orange, but at the cost of her deepest connection. In saving Liam, she also condemns herself to walk forward with the unbearable knowledge that he will look at her as a stranger if their paths ever cross again. The memory wipe is not a clean break. It is a scar Ruby will carry forever. She walks away from Liam not because she doesn't love him, but because she loves him enough to give him a chance to live without the constant shadow of danger she knows will always follow her. It is the ultimate, selfless act, the kind of sacrifice that doesn't come with applause or glory, only silence, loneliness, and the faint, lingering hope that maybe, somewhere deep inside, Liam's heart might remember what his mind has forgotten. In this devastating goodbye, the Darkest Minds delivers its most powerful message. That love, in its truest form, sometimes demands the most painful sacrifices, and that even when memories fade, the echoes of what we shared can still shape the people we become. After the harrowing loss of Liam's memories and the crushing realization that her personal happiness must be sacrificed for the greater good, Ruby Daly steps into a new, terrifying chapter, one where she can no longer afford to be the girl who hides. She has crossed a boundary within herself, walking away from the life she wanted and stepping into the life she must now lead. In this moment of unbearable loneliness, Ruby makes a decision that will redefine her purpose. She formally joins the Children's League. But what should feel like a moment of empowerment instead feels like shouldering a mantle soaked in the weight of impossible responsibility. For so long, Ruby ran from her power, from the world, from the nightmare of being classified as an orange. Now, as she places her life in the hands of the League, she stops running, not because the fear has vanished, but because there is no other choice left. The government's reach is suffocating, the camps are still filled with imprisoned children, and the illusion of safety has finally shattered into dust. Ruby is no longer the outsider peeking in. She is now a key player in a growing war. A war where children like her are no longer willing to be hunted, caged, or erased. But the League is not a sanctuary. It is a battlefield of politics, hidden agendas, and morally gray choices. They offer Ruby structure, resources, and a mission. But even within this rebellion, she senses the tightening grip of those who see her not as a person, but as a weapon. They praise her power, but their admiration is laced with expectation. They do not merely want her to help, they want her to lead, to fight, to wield her terrifying abilities against the very people who taught her to fear herself. Ruby's ascent into leadership is not a clean, heroic rise. It is slow, suffocating, and drenched in the weight of the lives now depending on her. The trust of others becomes a new kind of chain. The victories feel hollow when bought with the price of innocence. The lines between right and wrong blur as Ruby is forced to make decisions that will cost people their lives, friends, enemies, and sometimes those who fall heartbreakingly in between. And perhaps the cruelest irony is that the very thing she tried to suppress, her power, now becomes the one thing she must fully embrace to stand against the forces hunting them. The League does not ask Ruby to hide. They demand that she sharpen her skills, that she step into the arena as a soldier, a commander, a symbol for those who still live in fear. The little girl who erased herself from her parents' memories now becomes a leader whose memory will shape the resistance's future. Yet Ruby's leadership comes with a relentless ache. She no longer has Liam's hand to hold. She no longer has Chubs at her side or Zoo's silent comfort. The weight of leadership is a solitary road. She stands at the front, but she walks alone, haunted by the sacrifices she's made, driven by the children she couldn't save, and quietly terrified that the League may one day see her the same way the government does, a dangerous tool to be used and discarded. Ruby's choice to join the League is not the triumphant conclusion of her story. It is the sobering beginning of a much larger war. She chooses to lead, not because she believes she is strong enough, but because she knows that no one else will fight for these children if she doesn't. She becomes a beacon for those still trapped, a quiet, steady promise that the days of running and hiding are over. And even though her heart still aches for the life she left behind, Ruby steps forward into this new chapter with the quiet, unshakable resolve of someone who has lost everything, but still chooses to fight for something. Even as Ruby plunges deeper into her new life within the Children's League, where battles loom larger and responsibilities weigh heavier, her heart remains shackled to the one wound she cannot outrun, the memory of Liam Stewart, the boy who no longer remembers her. His absence is not just a missing person in her life, it is a hollow ache that follows her like a shadow, a question that rattles inside her chest. What happens when the person you love forgets you, but you can never forget them? Liam's memory has been carefully wiped clean of Ruby's presence. The moments they shared, their laughter, their desperate escapes, their quiet confessions, their near kisses under trembling stars, all dissolved like smoke, stolen from him by Ruby's own trembling hands. But memory is not just what lives in the mind, it is what lingers in the soul. And somehow, even though the images and words have been stripped away, something in Liam refuses to let her go. His body remembers what his mind does not. His heart holds on to a space where Ruby's name once lived, even if he cannot say why. When they briefly cross paths again after Ruby has joined the League, the scene becomes one of the most emotionally devastating in the entire story. Ruby, now standing in the full gravity of her power, disguised beneath the weight of leadership and loss, watches Liam from a distance, her throat thick with longing and regret. She wants to run to him, to tell him everything, to pour the memories back into his hands like sand slipping through her fingers. But she doesn't. She can't. Because his safety depends on this painful silence. And yet, even without the memories, Liam is drawn to her, confused but undeniably pulled. He looks at her with a flicker of recognition, something primal and unspoken, as if his soul is knocking on the walls of his erased mind, trying to remind him of something precious he has lost. It is the kind of heartbreak that does not scream. It quietly, steadily suffocates. Ruby knows she cannot stay, but neither can she bear to look away from him. From the man she once held, from the boy who once promised they would never leave each other behind. Liam's forgotten connection to Ruby becomes a ghost that haunts both of them. He doesn't understand why he feels a protective instinct toward her. He doesn't know why his heart accelerates in her presence or why her absence leaves an ache he cannot name. Memory may have been stolen, but the bond carved into the marrow of their beings refuses to die. This lingering connection raises haunting questions. Are we only the sum of our memories? Or is there something deeper, something the mind can lose but the soul can always remember? For Ruby, watching Liam exist without her is a punishment more brutal than any prison. She has to lead, to fight, to protect others, but inside, she carries a grief that is relentless. Every step forward is taken with the weight of a love that only she remembers, a story that now only lives in her. Their lingering, fractured connection becomes the silent promise of the story that even in a world of erased memories, government lies, and brutal war, love leaves traces that cannot be wiped away. The body remembers, the soul remembers, and though Ruby lets him go again, her heart clings to the hope that maybe, someday, somehow, the echoes of what they shared will lead Liam back to her, not through forced memories, but through the quiet pull of something much older and deeper. The Darkest Minds does not offer easy answers here. It leaves Ruby standing in that ache, carrying the unbearable knowledge that she saved him by losing him, that her most selfless act has condemned her to become a stranger to the person she loves most. And yet, despite the suffocating pain, she chooses to walk forward, because even in the face of loss, she still believes in the fight. She still believes that love, even when forgotten, leaves a mark that time, power, and fear can never fully erase. Hey guys, that wraps up our deep dive into The Darkest Minds, a story that reminds us that even in a world that tries to erase you, the fight for freedom, love, and identity is worth every sacrifice. We've journeyed through Ruby's transformation, the heartbreak of memory loss, and the brutal weight of leadership, showing us that the darkest moments often give rise to the brightest courage. If you enjoyed this detailed breakdown and want more powerful stories, emotional journeys, and hidden layers from your favorite films, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out. This is Real Talk Cinema, where we go beyond the screen to uncover the soul of every story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.